Welcome to Learning in Relation, creating online Indigenous language courses. We are so glad that you are here. ASL and Spanish interpretation is available for this webinar. We are also recording the webinar for later viewing. Chukma Sohochifoet Kari Chu, Chikasha Saya. Greetings, my name is Kari Chu. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, a Chickasaw language learner, and an assistant professor of Indigenous education at the University of Oklahoma. I'm also a collaborator with the Natalno One Mind, One People partnership at the University of Victoria. I'm organizing this event with graduate students Courtney, Tennell, and Melvin calls him, and will also serve as the moderator. Today, we are joined by a panel of Indigenous language advocates who will discuss what it means to center Indigenous ways of knowing and being in online Indigenous language learning spaces. We recognize that we are currently experiencing multiple crises in our world, including a pandemic and war. Some of our panelists and team have been impacted very personally by this, and so I want to offer special thanks to them for being here. And one panelist, Sarah Child, could not be here, and so we'll keep her in our thoughts. I also want to thank everyone who's joining us in the audience and hope that in hearing about the important work our panelists are doing, that you feel encouragement and hope to continue in your important work. I'm now going to pass it over to Courtney, who will share a bit about our project.
Hello, my name is Courtney Tennell. I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen and I'm a doctoral student here in the Zaro Center on Transition and Self-Determination at OU. This webinar is part of a larger project that we're working on about how Indigenous communities enact relationality in online Indigenous language courses. For this project, we are talking with Indigenous language course creators and also looking at examples of Indigenous language courses from around the world. We have created an interactive map that shows where each course is situated with links to the course's webpage. Our goal for this project is to share practical strategies with Indigenous nations and organizations, as well as others working to support language revitalization through technology. We are in the process of creating an open access guidebook with resources for communities who want to use technology to support their language revitalization. And we look forward to sharing this guidebook with you all when it's complete.
Aho, Aonia. Good afternoon. My name is Melvin Carlson Jr., and I come from the Ponca and Muskogee Creek Nations of Oklahoma. And I am a doctoral student in the Adult and Higher Education program at OU. As we join together in this virtual space, we invite you to reflect on your relation to the place where you are now. If you'd like, share a greeting and the place you're from in the chat. Our organizing team is from the University of Oklahoma. The University of Oklahoma is on land placed by its creator in the care and protection of the Caddo and Wichita peoples, and originally shared by many Indigenous nations, including the Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, and Osage, as a place of gathering and exchange. Today, 39 tribal nations reside in what is currently known as Oklahoma, many as a result of settler colonial policies of removal that were designed to erase Indigenous people. No matter where we are logging in from, we acknowledge our connection and responsibilities to place and honor the land as a relative. It is my honor to now welcome Lokosh Joshua Hinson from the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma. Lokosh will offer opening words in his Indigenous language, Chickasaw.
Yokokage Manley. I'm gonna open up this meeting with some words from Mrs. Wellman. I'm sorry, she passed away. It's just I know Kari. She passed away on Sunday. Ingi Joa Bash Benilima. Makanita Kanya Pokota Vamatilasha Nanupano, Taeshugma. Atakia Bashaka, Shima Ashke. Shalom Bishop the Tupakot. Iba Fokaman and a moment Tanashki, Shimaba Hanchashki, and Anuhotana Panut, Ashukma. Nanagetaman Pumbanagma, Chimasajo, Ishahanchitok, Magnetiki Kaili, Chimasauki, Yabat the Fama Tilashika, Nano, Chimasi Slugmat, Ayasleon, Ichimasi Slugma, Tishimachashki, Chihuama, Yokoke, Chimanchi. Oh.
Yakoke Lokosh. Mrs. Woolman was one of my very first teachers of the language, and so this was definitely a hard loss for all of us. Okay, so today we're joined by a graphic recording artist, Tanya Gadsby from Fuselight Creative, and we'll now welcome Tanya to share about the graphic recording process for today.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm Tanya Gadsby. I'm zooming in from Lokosh territory, currently known as Victoria, BC, and I'm pleased to be your graphic recorder for this session. And I will be capturing a summary of what we hear today and organizing it into key themes on this graphic, drawing in real time while these ideas are shared. And we'll periodically share the graphic into this space during this session so you can check it out as it evolves. And this will be shared out with everyone after the session as well. Thank you, Kari.
We will now hear from our panelists. There will be a Q&A segment following presentations. Please use the Q&A box to submit your questions. If someone has already asked a question that you also have, you can use, there's a little thumbs up icon in there. And so if you want to click the thumbs up, it will upvote the question, and on our end, it will bring it to the top of the list. So if there's a really great question that you want to make sure it gets asked, go ahead and upvote it so that we can see it. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Candace Galla. Candace is Ganaka Hawaii from Hawaii Island and an associate professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education. Oops. And the Institute for Critical Indigenous Studies at the University of British Columbia. Her research focuses on Indigenous language learning through digital and emerging technologies, embodied language practices, and materials development. Welcome, Candace.
Aloha mai kākou, o wau no o Candace Kaleimamoowahinekapu Galla, he kanaka Hawaii ma ka mokupuni nui o ke ave, he polopeka ma ke kula nui o Kolumepia Pelekania ma ka aina pono I o ka lahui masquim. Mahalo nui, thank you very much, Dr. Kari Chu, and the entire team for organizing this space for us to speak about Indigenous language learning with digital tools and technologies. I'm grateful to be joining this webinar from the traditional lands of the Tongva people and recognize that while we are all joining from different parts of the globe, we are connected and bringing forth our Indigenous knowledges to the space to further our individual and collective understanding of digital tools and technologies as it relates to Indigenous language revitalization and education. I hope that my presentation on relational accountability to Indigenous communities, Indigenous languages, digital tools, and technology imparts some insight. In our Indigenous communities, there has always been a recognition, respect, and relational accountability to our kin and to the more than human relations, which includes our waters, mountains, trees, rocks, four-legged, the winged, gilled, and so forth. This kin-centric ecology represents our intimate connections and our relations to one another and to our natural world, in particular to the lands that have birthed us. As we have been engaging with and through the means of digital tools throughout the pandemic, we are now more cognizant of the benefits technology can offer. For those of us who have been engaged in Indigenous language work and technology prior to the pandemic, we have grappled with technology, have had to come to understand the tensions and opportunities whereby we need to question, explore, and analyze digital tools and technology. And sometimes even when suggesting it to our language speaker or learner community, may have even experienced some resistance, and for very good reasons. The same digital tools and technologies that we have considered, used, adopted, and adapted have created yet additional domains for dominant settler languages to occupy, overtake, and colonize, thereby reoccupying our lands, traditional and new and emerging spaces like the digital and virtual environments. For nearly 2 decades, we've talked about bridging the digital divide of Indigenous peoples. But can we say that the digital divide is shrinking, or is it continuing to grow as we think about Indigenous languages, digital tools, and technologies? While we can agree that we are engaging more than we've ever had through technology, are all of our community members, language speakers, learners, youth, adults, and elders receiving equitable access to digital tools and technologies? During my presentation, I will address 4 main themes that we as Indigenous language speakers, learners, teachers, community members, curriculum developers, content creators, technologists can consider as we grapple with the tensions of digital tools, while also considering the opportunities and potential benefits. I will be posing questions throughout my presentation as a way for us to expand our knowledge about technology use, to question, critique, and better understand the choices we make when using technology for Indigenous language learning and teaching. While I have some real-world experiences, personal and professional, research, and some insight, I don't claim to know the answers to these questions, as we need to answer these in context and in relation to our respective communities and language situations. I also acknowledge that I am not speaking for or on behalf of communities that claim me, nor for Indigenous peoples, communities, and nations in general. I want to emphasize that there is no singular, homogeneous Indigenous epistemology that can capture the uniqueness, complexities, nuances, and worldviews of distinct Indigenous peoples, and there is no one size that fits all. It is my intention that this webinar allows us to be honest about our relation with and attachment to technology and encourage dialogue that results in a meaningful and relevant change that has positive impact on our communities and the communities that we are privileged to work alongside. The 4 areas that I will discuss briefly include relationality, Indigenous data sovereignty, decolonizing praxis, and adaptability and sustainability. Dr. Vine Deloria, in his book God is Red, A Native View of Religion, states that American Indians hold their lands, places, as having the highest possible meaning, and all their statements are made with this reference point in mind. Therefore, when we engage with our Indigenous languages, we understand that language is connected to community, to the people of the community, and to a specific land, geography, and region. Dr. Robin Kimmerer poses the following questions in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. How in our modern world can we find our way to understand the earth as a gift again, to make our relations with the world sacred again? Can we behave as if the living world were a gift? She states and continues, gifts from the earth or from each other establish a particular relationship, an obligation of sorts to give, to receive, and to reciprocate. So how are we as Indigenous peoples and those who are engaging with digital tools and technology for language learning, keeping Indigenous languages and places, along with the community and people and language in mind? It may be common for tech companies and or developers in reaching out to help Indigenous language groups to forget that language exists because of a community and not an individual. I'm sure we can name examples where the people and community were not even considered in the development. I want us to be mindful that these companies, organizations, and schools of thought exist today in places that we work, go to school, and or are affiliated with. So when we engage with digital tools and technology, are we centering community needs and goals? And is language centered in community, or is language being treated as a standalone object and data set that is void of culture, land, community, and generations of people? The vital connection of recognizing language as a foundation to people and a community is important as we engage with various digital tools and digital technology. We know that technology has the power to connect. However, it also has the capacity to further disconnect and divide, thereby not getting language to those who want it or need it. We want to ensure that our use of technology is returning our languages to our lands, to our communities, into our homes, schools, and to the ears and hearts of our people, thus benefiting us, Indigenous language speakers, Indigenous language learners, first and foremost. And any benefit to other entities or stakeholders are not central. The slogan for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which began this year, is "Nothing for us without us." Anything that is for us should include us, no question. If we are developing and creating language opportunities, digital tools, and technologies, what steps have we gone through to ensure proper care, respect, protocol, permission in order to engage in the work that we are doing? Though we may have been entrenched and guided by our traditional disciplines, our practices do not need to represent a time of the past. We can evolve and change by unlearning non-relational practices and relearning how to be in relation to one another, to the land and the life ways for the benefit of the community. Now let's transition to Indigenous data sovereignty. According to the US Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network, Indigenous data sovereignty is the right of a nation to govern the collection, ownership, and application of its own data. It derives from tribes' inherent right to govern their peoples, lands, and resources. This concept of data sovereignty positions Indigenous nations' activities to govern data within an Indigenous rights framework. Indigenous data sovereignty essentially recognizes that data and knowledge are inextricable from community and encompasses Indigenous values like respect for the data and those who are providing the data, as well as principles of OCAP as shared by the First Nations Information Governance Center. The principles of OCAP refers to ownership, control, access, and possession, whereby First Nations have control over data collection processes, and establishes how First Nations data and information will be collected, protected, used, and or shared. OCAP is a tool to support data, knowledge, information governance on the path to First Nations data sovereignty. There are a handful of other international organizations and networks that also assert Indigenous peoples' rights when it comes to data. But in the interest of time, we'll direct you to these two networks. When we engage with digital tools and technology, are we paying attention to the agreements that we effortlessly are agreeing to by scrolling quickly to the bottom of the page on the screen? What are we agreeing to? What are the implications when we share data and knowledge about our language on proprietary platforms, even in private groups? Who does this data belong to now? What can these companies do with our so-called data, and what does that mean for our languages? And what would this mean for language and material that we consider sacred? How much control do we really have when we are using a tool that is not developed by us and developed for us? Indigenous data sovereignty helps us to be cognizant of what we should consider when engaging with digital tools and technologies for language learning and teaching. It is okay to question as through our questions we can be better informed on whether we adopt, adapt, or develop specific technologies for our language goals. Now let's turn to decolonizing praxis. Recognizing that there are many examples of language software, tools, and technologies that have effectively taught language, specifically dominant majority world languages with millions of speakers, how many of these examples have included cultural knowledge, relevant photos and images that represent individual communities and not stock photos, and culturally appropriate phrases or learning activities? Oftentimes, language communities are not necessarily consulted, or if they are, an individual is contacted towards the end of the project in a sense to confirm or provide some kind of approval or validation. And maybe some of us on the panel, as well as in the audience, have received these types of requests. When we are engaging, designing, and developing language learning, digital tools and technologies, how are we decolonizing our practice? Is the development, process, and outcome deeply embodied and embedded in Western ideologies, or does it reflect our Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing? In Dr. Joshua Schwab-Cortez's research and paper, Keeping Up with the Sun, Revitalizing Isthmus, Zapotec, and Ancestral Practices Through Cell Films, he grounds his work in comunalidad, an Indigenous Oaxaca methodology and practice and multivocal community process that is rooted in a commitment to strengthening the future of communal lifeways. He continues and states that comunalidad manifests within a Zapotec cosmovision, asserting local strategies that engage cultural praxis, such as making black bean tamales, planting corn crops, or doing other embodied ancestral Zapotec practices, a process quite distinct from a classroom and curriculum-based approach. Partnered with cell film, informed by the techniques of participatory video research, the development process and outcomes of his project centered and included the community, collaborated across the generations of language learners and speakers, while effectively engaged learning through praxis, used new technologies specific to the community, and supported the transfer of knowledge, language, and embodied practices in the 21st century. We can look to examples like this on how to decolonize our praxis by engaging our community for the benefit of our community, be it building our language capacity, being introduced to and becoming literate in digital tools and technology, strengthening our community, and so forth. We need to ask ourselves, when we are designing language learning opportunities via digital tools and technologies, are we using the default design that is grounded in Western ideologies and systems of understanding? Or again, are we making a concerted effort to adapt or create our own tools to reflect our community values and pedagogy? Can decolonizing our praxis create a positive effect on Indigenous language learning? In designing and developing language learning opportunities, let's not just focus on the outcome of learning a phrase, sentence pattern, or grammatical structure, but rather the process and journey of language learning through relationality and reciprocity, engagement with knowledge, and building of a community of practice. Digital tools and technology are a medium with which we can access and learn language. However, we need to remember that people are tasked with creating these tools so that we can benefit. We do not need to be constrained by the way we've used technology or experienced technology for language learning. We have the freedom to be creative, to dream and imagine future possibilities. Let's invest in digital tools and technologies that embody our Indigenous ideologies, pedagogies, epistemologies, and that are accountable to, benefit, and in service of our communities. And lastly, let's briefly discuss adaptability and sustainability. Some of us are all too familiar with language materials and resources that were created at the turn of the century, only to find that when we try to open these digital files, we're unable to read, access, or decipher what we wrote or typed. What we end up seeing are nonsensical symbols that are irrelevant to us or to our language, or an empty box also known as tofu, which results in a loss of data. As technology evolves at a steady rate, we want to anticipate that language data and knowledge embedded in these digital tools and technologies, as well as the digital tools and technologies themselves, that we are using and are developing have some way of being accessible, transferable, and usable in the case of a software or tech company deciding to no longer support these technologies. How then are we ensuring that we will have access to our language materials in the foreseeable future? In Dr. Mary Hermes, Dr. Megan Bang, and Dr. Ananda Marin's paper on designing Indigenous language, they write about a participatory process of Anishinaabemowin materials development and creation that engages community in an effort to help carry language learning beyond the classrooms and into all domains of Indigenous life. In their design, they have reclaimed and repurposed digital tools and technologies for language revitalization toward meaningful community-driven goals. These scholars help us to think about and think beyond documentation and preservation efforts that, in a sense, can fossilize language. They conclude that it is up to communities to retool documentation efforts towards productive regeneration in communities, moving to revitalize our languages and seeing them as living can open up creative possibilities for communities rather than generating only preservation efforts. We want to steer away from digital tools and technologies that fossilize and make the data inaccessible or unavailable for our future learning, whether it is 1 year from today or 25 years out. We need to find ways that continue to build on our language work and not set us back when a digital tool and technology is no longer supported or used, or the license expires, or it is now not affordable to the community. We need to find ways to repurpose our language and language data to create additional opportunities for learning, while also recognizing that we need to consider flexibility, adaptability, and compatibility to and toward other digital tools that we use and or create while working to sustain the future of our language. As I wrap up, I want to again re-emphasize that when we engage in digital tools and technology for Indigenous language learning, that we consider how we are enacting relationality, how we are acknowledging Indigenous data sovereignty, how we are decolonizing our practice, and how we are ensuring the sustainability of our language. I leave us yet with more questions. How does Indigenous lived realities determine, influence, and or affect the uptake of digital technologies? How is technology advancing community-led and directed language revitalization, reclamation, and education efforts? Who is benefiting and who has access? What are the unintended consequences of engaging with digital tools and technology? And what are the benefits? In what ways are we being responsive, proactive, and or reactive to our current language situation and to the needs of those we are supporting? How are we building language capacity in community and for community? What kinds of political, ethical, moral, and spiritual, social, and scientific discussions should we be having around the relationship between tribal governmental command of digital technologies, uses of ICTs by Native peoples, and Indigenous pathways to decolonization? And this is from Duarte. How do we imagine our Indigenous futures with digital tools and technology? And lastly, how do we as Indigenous people reconcile the fully embodied experience of being on the land with the generally disembodied experience of virtual spaces? How do we come to understand this new territory, knit it into our existing understanding of our lives, lived in real space, and claim it as our own? And this is from Louis, Arista, Petraeus, and Kite's work. Technology has the immense power to reconnect us to our language, provide us access to resources through digital means, offers a multitude of ways of communication and expression, and expands our language domains. While there are many benefits, we also need to consider the challenges digital tools and technologies may pose for Indigenous language revitalization and education. Let's not compromise our Indigenous languages to fit digital tools and technologies. Let's adjust, adapt, and/or create digital tools and technologies to fit our Indigenous languages, our Indigenous language goals and needs that will carry our languages into the future. Mahalo anui.
Okay, Candace. Part of our project has been doing some interviews with different people who have created courses, and many of the questions that you've raised for the audience, are things that people have been discussing in these interviews. And I know will be of great interest to those who are watching, and will also be explored further by our next panelists. So as a reminder to those in the audience, I know some folks joined a little later. We do have Spanish interpretation. Captions are enabled. And if you have questions for the presenters, we'll save them to the end, but you can go ahead and enter them into the Q&A box now. And so that's all available for you. Now what we'll do is we're going to check in with our graphic recording artist, Tanya Gadsby, for an update on what's happening with the visuals.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for that wonderful presentation. Really excellent points that were raised there. We heard a lot around data sovereignty, the principles of OCAP, and data ownership and control being really core to a lot of what's developed, and tools and tech based in our ways of knowing, not relying on the Western way, the colonizer way of organizing and creating learning applications, as well as the really key piece around relationality, that it's important this is rooted in community and people. And finally, always thinking of our languages as living, including how we put together courses and technology tools, that we don't want to have it trapped in obsolete tech, our little fossilized guy down here. So thank you for that wonderful presentation. And back to you, Kari.
Okay, Tanya. So it's my great honor to welcome our next speakers. Heather Souter and Olivia Sammons join us to talk about the Southern Michif 7,000 Languages course. Heather is a citizen of the Red River Métis Nation and a member of the Manitoba Métis Federation. She holds a Master's of Education in Indigenous Language Revitalization from the University of Victoria and teaches Michif at the University of Manitoba. Heather also runs Prairies to Woodlands Indigenous Language Revitalization Circle with Elder Bernard de Montigny. Their focus is on the reestablishment of vibrant speech communities for Métis languages using a decolonizing framework. Olivia is an assistant professor in Indigenous languages and linguistics at the First Nations University of Canada. Her work focuses on Indigenous language documentation, description, and revitalization with a focus on Michif and Algonquian languages. Welcome, Heather and Olivia.
Tansikia Wawanots, Heather Souter Deshna Karshan, and Michif, Camperville, Manitoba, Newikin, Egwa, Anoch, Camperville, Manitoba, Osti, Imbigishwan. Egwa, Olivia?
Tansikia Wow, Olivia Sammons, Deshna Karshan, Ottawa, Ontario, Newikin, Egwa. So hello, everyone. I'm Olivia Sammons, and this is Heather Souter. Heather, did you want to continue here? Or
Sure. As is the custom amongst my people and as I've been directed by my elders, I would just like to start by with an invocation. Bonjour, kichimane kichia marsidi tuan per kakio le moro taka e chikanoch. Ega wichi hinan per mia toskiak per no langinan. No langinan. Egwa wichi hinan mina. Chipimata shiach koyesh otadan te. Kito marsidi tuan per madajuni egwa kakio le moro taka e chik. Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Okay, so here's just an overview of what we'll be speaking to you about today. We'll talk to you about the background and motivation for the course, give you a little bit of an introduction, talk more about the challenges and considerations and the applications that we've had and how this has contributed to community building, and share some of our final thoughts with you. So who we are. So Prairies to Woodlands Indigenous Language Revitalization Circle is now an incorporated nonprofit, and we work out of Camperville, Manitoba, which is a traditional Métis community in central northern Manitoba. And our mandate is, as Kari alluded to, is that reestablishing speech communities for Métis languages using a decolonizing framework. Plus looking at how trauma has affected our communities, so using a trauma-informed and social justice lens, and all working towards having strong, vibrant languages, culture, our culture and communities. As I was introduced, I am a Michif, a Métis citizen. I am also a speaker of quite a number of different languages, not all of them Indigenous. I am very active in my community. I live in Camperville and choose to live and teach from Camperville remotely because I want to be connected to the land and the people. So Camperville is located in the homelands of the Métis people and also on Treaty 2 territory. Olivia?
Yeah, so I'm Olivia. I am coming to you guys from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And I'm a linguist by training with some background in language education. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with Michif language speakers and community members over the last number of years. And these are courses through 7,000 languages are one of our most recent projects. So, and just to give a little bit of background about the Métis people and the language. So Michif, Southern Michif, is one of 3 language varieties that's spoken by the Métis. The Métis have a history of removal and forced displacement, which gave rise to multiple speech communities throughout the prairies. And so you can find it spoken in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Canada. And then it's also, a cross-border language, so into parts of North Dakota and Montana. The language itself is structurally complex, and it's what is often referred to as a contact language because it has parts that it's kind of a mixture of Cree and French, which makes it really interesting. And it's being actively revitalized and reclaimed by Métis people across the homelands, but it is endangered. And then Heather?
Yeah. So our motivation for creating the course was because we have such a large diaspora that there are people all over the Prairies regions and into northern British Columbia, southern, actually northwestern Ontario, and then into the northern part of the United States as well. And it was being very difficult for learners to get access to authentic language resources. We have a dictionary that we've been digitizing, just an aside here, that went out of print in 1983. And so now to find copies of it is almost impossible. And so, you know, that's just indicative of the lack of resources really that we've had for our languages. And so we wanted to look at this course as being one way that we could reach out and kind of level the playing field. And in general, we all know that there's been increased interest and demand also for learning materials. So we were answering the call for these particular reasons.
And our main partners for this project, for creating these courses, were obviously Prairies, and then the National Research Council of Canada provided support in terms of funding. We're very grateful for that. And the organization 7,000 Languages, which I'm sure you guys will be hearing more about. And our project team, this is our lovely team. So Prairies to Woodlands, these were the members that were involved in various aspects of the project management, writing the curriculum, doing the documentation, the recordings, getting them all uploaded and put into the course. On the 7,000 Languages side of things, these are the people that helped out with that. We're very grateful to them putting in lots of extra time. And then these are our wonderful speakers. So Grace Ledoux-Zoldi, Connie Henry, and Berna DeMontney. Heather also did a pinch hit a bit with recording as well. So we're really grateful to have all of these speakers represented here. So just to give you guys an idea of the courses, what they're about. So I'm saying courses here because there actually are 3. So we didn't intend to create 3 courses. We just set out to do 1. But after drafting everything, we realized that we had way too much content to cram into 1 course, that it would be, really overwhelming for the learners and probably not as effective. So it was actually Kaylee from 7,000 Languages who said, well, you can do more than 1 course. We said, oh, and so, it meant more work for her. So it was very nice of her to even make that suggestion, but we ended up doing 1 main course, which is the top one you see there, the Southern Michif for beginners. And then we did 2 kind of mini courses as supplements. So the second one focused on verbs, and the third one focused on vocabulary. And just a bit of general information about the courses. So they include recordings by both first and second language speakers. This is an effort to honor all speakers, old and new. It was developed on the Transparent Language Learning Platform, developed freely accessible online and downloadable as a mobile app. And this whole process of being involved in, developing these courses has contributed to developing local capacity and technologies for Indigenous language documentation and revitalization. Let's see. So even just in thinking about how we're going to approach this at the beginning, we identified some priorities that we wanted to have right off the bat. One of those was that we wanted it to be interactive and communication-based. That was really important to us, that it was based in the social reality of Michif-speaking people. So, drawing on situations where learners could actually use the language in their everyday lives. We wanted to have clear, straightforward terminology as much as possible, so learners didn't get bogged down in learning all the terms for things on top of the actual language. And we wanted it to be fun. We wanted learners to be able to play around and be creative. And we wanted there to be a social aspect of some kind, which can be a challenge when you're looking at doing an online language course that people usually do on their own.
So the approach we took for Southern Michif for beginners was presenting short conversations to build vocabulary and conversations, as Olivia was saying, that are based in our social reality and our cultural realities. We ended up using text and audio lessons. We could have done more with video and images. It just ended up that way. There were some constraints we had. So that's how it ended up. We also made sure that the language learning of the grammar anyways was implicit. So there wasn't a lot of explanation about things, but it was very carefully crafted so that people could see how our language actually builds up from simple forms to more complex forms. And so I'd like to give a shout out to Dr. Connor Quinn for discussions that I had with him on numerous occasions about the minimalist framework, which really helped in doing some kind of backward planning in our language, being an Algonquian language, polysynthetic, like many languages, Indigenous languages are. It was really, really useful for us to use this approach in addition to focusing on a communicative language that allowed people to communicate immediately. So we wanted people to feel successful right away. And that was really important, but not get bogged down like Olivia was saying earlier with linguistic terminology or grammar terminology. And the other thing that we focused on, because we also run a Master Apprentice program, among many other things that we do at Prairies to Woodlands, we wanted to ensure that there was a lot of learner language, so survival phrases, so that people would stay in Michif even while they were learning. So if they're asking for new language, they would be able to ask for new language or supports by using Michif rather than having to go back into English. And we really wanted people to be creative, be able to know that they could say novel things, say things that they thought up or that they were feeling in the language. And so we worked hard to ensure that people would not be overwhelmed by the amount of language that was presented in each of the lessons or lessonlets, I guess, and that they felt that they could be creative. And just an aside, one of the stories or one of the conversations we have in there, just to add a little bit of fun, was with a Martian coming to Earth and talking to a Michif person, so that people could see that we can do all sorts of creative and innovative things with their language. It worked really well for language learning too, for some of the simpler constructions as well. So here is just an overview of the content. I had 20 units, each with 1 to 8 lessons. So as I mentioned, there's survival phrases, questions, greetings, hospitality, weather terms, family terms. Especially family terms are important to Michif people and many Indigenous, or I would say almost all, if not all, Indigenous peoples. But we talked about things that people could use in their everyday life. We made sure that people would be able to use the language and feel confident in using the language immediately. So all of these topics were covered, and then some of the more grammatical, I guess, language pattern aspects that were covered are things like the French frozen copula, adjectives, notation, possessives, deictics, adpositions, etc., etc. We had a choice of quite a few activities that could be used in the 7,000 languages or that transparent language platform. We didn't use all of them. We did ensure that there was how we structured things, and the activities that we used focused both on declarative and procedural knowledge, but we focused mostly on using the activities that dealt with listening, speaking, and reading. And the reason why we didn't focus on writing is that we lack a widely used standardized writing system. We do have a standardized or a consistent writing system, but it's just not official or widely used. And so we didn't want learners coming on and writing things the way that maybe their auntie or grandma had written them and getting it wrong in the course. We wanted to be really careful that we respected the fact that there are multiple ways of writing still out there and accepted. And as I mentioned earlier, it is text heavy. Thank you. So here we just have a screenshot from from the course that just shows how we have the unit objectives laid out, and so that people will know what they can learn from doing this particular unit. And so they can choose whether or not they're interested in this or whether or not they want to go on to something else. We encourage people to work through the course because of using the minimalist approach. We build off of grammar patterns, often build off of grammar patterns we've used in previous units and lessons. But this just allows people some more autonomy so that they can choose what they want to learn when they want to learn it. So this is another example of a screenshot. So this is a learning path example from the main course. And you can see that there's just a little bit of information about what's included in it. And this is basically just how it's laid out all through all 20 units. Mm-hmm. So we had 3 courses. We ended up with 3 courses, right? So the main course, which gives the framework, I would say, for a beginner to learn the language. And then we added in a verb course because we knew that we needed to provide more basic verbs to people. And we just didn't have enough room in the course itself. There's some constraints and limitations when creating a course, the 7,000 language course. So we just ended up, again, thanks to Kaylee's suggestion, making some more. So we focused on verbs, and then we did another one on vocabulary called Kaleimamoowahinekapu. And so this just basically introduces vocabulary language chunks more in a sense.
Which means, sorry, Nawalimo, it means more words in the chip.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we did. I didn't put that in there. Sorry, I'm so used to seeing it. I didn't put that. More words in the chip. So simply put, yes, more. Thank you, Olivia. Yeah, and so we just added some communicative language that we just could not fit into the course that we thought was important.
Yeah, so there were some things that we really had to give a lot of thought to as we went throughout this process. One of the main ones was, right off the bat, how is the language data going to be collected and used? Kind of what Candace was talking about. And I know that was something that Heather had a series of extended conversations with folks at 7,000 Languages and the NRC to talk about, what that all means, what it would look like. And so basically in the end, we arrived at a community-centered license agreement. So that was, a real consideration there, and obviously also consulting with elders and, what their thoughts were about it as well. Identifying pedagogical frameworks. So in the beginning, we kind of talked a lot about how are we even going to structure this, and there's so many ways of doing that. So really thinking through that, there is a lack of resources for Michif. So there were times where we were basically trying to write a lesson and figuring out the grammar ourselves at the same time. So because it wasn't documented anywhere that we could find. So, that is a reality that often happens, I think, with a lot of Indigenous languages. And there are also, for the resources that do exist, there's a tradition of using terminology that is less than straightforward, we'll say. And so that was something else as well. So, and then another really big one was a lack of standardization in terms of orthography and in terms of, dialect variation. And this can be a really sensitive topic for a lot of people. And so we definitely approach this with a lot of reflection and discussion. And, there can be real consequences for how the course will be received, used or not used, things like that. So we really wanted to approach this in a respectful and inclusive way. So, we spent a lot of time, weighing different options. In the end, you kind of have to make a call one way or another, or you'll just, you won't be able to go forward with things. Something that we wanted to keep in the front of our minds was what is going to be the most effective for learners. And so that was something, that kind of drove our choices. And, whichever way you choose, just make sure that you're consistent, because if you're not, it will be very confusing for learners if you're going back and forth between orthographies or, dialects or things like that. And so one way that we approached this was, not to say, like this is the right way and the only way, but, just saying like for orthography, we said there are many different ways of writing Michif. This is what we're doing, this, and then spell it out. This is what maps to this, and, just be clear about it, and not, making a hard line in the sand. And then for variation, in the introduction of the course, we had a statement about variation, just emphasizing that all ways of speaking are valid. And so we're not trying to promote one variety over another, but they're all honored and valid and important. So that was one way that we, tried to address this issue of lack of standardization. And then as far as terminology goes, wherever possible, we tried to use Michif internal ways of referencing grammatical phenomena instead of using technical linguistic terminology. So one thing that's really common with Michif and Algonquian linguistics is, this division between nouns where there's sort of living nouns and non-living, which are called animate and inanimate. And we just called those ana and anima words, referring to the living and not living. And it seemed to work pretty well, I think, with the folks who have used the course so far. Yeah. Oh, Heather, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes. So one of the biggest things was how this tool was going to help us recreate speech communities. And, it was really hard. There were tensions between pedagogy, the pedagogical approaches that we wanted to take, and the course framework itself, the physical framework of how, like a computerized, computer-assisted language learning course is set up. And also problems between an online asynchronous course and language that is necessarily social and relationally focused, especially when learning. That's just how it is. So we had to think about how this would support that. So one of the things we thought about from the very beginning was how to use a decolonizing framework and to work from within the language, thus talking about, say, even using terminology that was internal to Michif, as Olivia mentioned, but also focusing on making sure that we were building capacity to do this language work for ourselves, so that as we move forward, we might be able to better adapt or even create frameworks that are much more relationally oriented. We wanted to celebrate Indigenous worldviews, especially our worldview and ways of living in our communities in this development. We made sure that we launched a social media group before the course was launched, so that there would be a way for people to engage with each other, their peers and speakers, as they were working through the course. That was really important. We couldn't do that internal to the course, so we realized that we need kind of an envelope for that, to do that. And encourage people, of course, to look at this course as just being one tool among many, especially recognizing that breath-to-breath learning and breath-to-breath speech communities are paramount, and that's where the language really lives, is out in the air with all of us. So it was really about how to connect, make connections between the Métis diaspora and those living in home communities as well, because we're spread out over such a large geographical area. So we had a launch on March 19th last year called Creators in Conversation. And our messaging was about coming and having fun with us, that it was free. It allows you to learn at on your own schedule, and that you could learn with a community of dedicated language learners. So that's how we approached right from the beginning, trying to build in relationality into the use of the course.
And well, before the pandemic,
yes,
we had actually planned to go around and, do a live, visit many communities. That it turned into a virtual thing. So
that's right. So it was supposed to be in the communities where we demonstrated it, and we ate with everybody and we had fun with everybody in person. We had tried it out, but this is what it turned into because of the pandemic. Yes. Thank you, Olivia. So how is it being used today? I went in and checked, and it looks like we have 567 users still. It's being used to supplement language courses at the University of Manitoba, where I teach. I also use it with online community language classes. For community building right now, we have over 800 members of our Facebook group that focuses on this language. And to become a member of the Facebook group, you actually have to ask quite a few questions about, what your intentions are, what your positionality is, so that we all know where we're coming from. It's not necessarily to exclude people, but I think it's really important for people to think about those things as they enter into a group of learners where many of whom have been traumatized and they're suffering from intergenerational trauma, especially around language learning, and there's a large burden of shame. So we wanted just to make sure that people understood what they were, the community that they were entering into. And on a more technical note, the sound files, we've repurposed the sound files as well from a Chief phrase of the day, and they're also going to be going, the phrases used in the course will be put on plaques for a walking trail. It's happening right now, and with QR codes. So we've repurposed things. So we're repurposing. So it's not just in the course, we're taking advantage of it. And we have copyright elders and we have copyright of everything. That was a really big, so data sovereignty, we hear you. Next, please, thank you. So here, we're not going to read this, but if you can have a quick read yourselves, you can see these are some of the community voices from the Facebook community group using the course, and you can see some of the things, we've highlighted some of the things that we think are particularly telling. That it was accessible before, and they like the gamified way of looking at things. They can use language in many situations, not feeling rushed, because they can do it at their own pace, and that the delight that they feel at being able to recognize the fluent language, the words that the fluent language speaker is using. And there's one more. Candace B is a young woman who has a young family, and her daughter reminds her every day that they have to do Michif, and she wants to use the program with her. And she likes that that the themes, and they're not really themes, but the conversations are focused on things that we would actually do with our relations, especially our older relations, and that it's culturally relevant. So again, focusing on the younger people, it's saying that they like it because it's interactive and gamified, and again, very accessible. So there's some positive thoughts there. So some future directions we have is using the course as part of synchronous online community classes in a broader way than we have been. Perhaps creating additional standalone lessons in the lesson author, using the lesson authoring tool available on the platform. So you can add single lessons afterwards, which is really great. So you can have your whole course and you add these lessons. So technically you can keep on working on them. So it's increasing the information that's out there. And then possibly doing a version in the Turtle Mountain orthography, which is in the dictionary I spoke about earlier in the presentation. And then maybe even creating a new higher level course. So our final thoughts, we highly recommend that you investigate the legal issues around intellectual property, copyright, and data sovereignty very early on, that you have in-depth discussions with your elders, your community, and your partners, because this almost was a deal breaker for us. that we almost said, no, we're not going to do this. It's great that you want to help us do this for free, but we're not going to do this. So it took a lot of discussion for us to get to a place that we felt comfortable. We felt that that the benefits outweighed the risks. And also to plan early for the soft side of integration into relational learning. So to be really clear about how you're going to use this tool to build up your community and to ensure that the focus is on interpersonal communication and that it's grounded in your social and cultural realities. So, and a more practical thing here is understanding the back end of the platforms, because there's many important things that you can learn from poking around in the back of the course, the metrics, who's using what, and how to manage classes. So you can actually have classes and different classes using the course. So that's something that I think knowing that you can do that early and how that might work or not work for your community. Of course, expecting and planning for challenges and delays. That's always difficult when the funding that we get usually is project-based and there's deliverables and timelines. So this can be particularly difficult, but to really make sure that you give yourself enough time to do this. Including your budget. Now, online launch and marketing. I think that, even if the pandemic wasn't here, that we would have had to have done that anyways to reach all the people who we wanted to reach. So include that in your budget. Something else is also to include animation of your social media groups in your planning. So we have a Facebook group for now around this course, and sometimes it is really a challenge to get in there and to comment enough to keep things moving and lively and vibrant. So that's something to really consider, that you might have to dedicate a person to do that. And that would be their main role. And as I mentioned, the use of media created for the course in other ways. It's really important. We have a minimum amount of time to do a lot of work. And so finding ways to reuse and new ways to utilize the recordings in particular is great. And then, of course, always keep in mind that once you finish your course, you're going to find some typos, you're going to find some things that, to the best of your ability, you thought that everything was good and there's going to be some mistakes. You need the time to go in and correct those. And then also, how are you going to improve it or update it when you learn new things or new ways that you weren't exposed to before you started on the journey. So we have other technology related projects as well. I've been working with the National Research Council as the chair of the Indigenous Language Technology Advisory Group. And we have made a couple of things with them. The Turtle Mountain Talking Dictionary, again, this course, the Turtle Mountain Talking Dictionary, which Olivia is also a co-lead on. And we have a verb conjugator that is just coming out in another version. So probably if you clicked on the link today, you wouldn't get anything, but in a few days from now you will. And that one was built from the bottom up by a Métis computer science master's student and an intern, an ally at the National Research Council. So it's very exciting to look at the capacity building that was going on with that. And then we're mobilizing some legacy recordings, and this also has been a bit of a challenge. We're excited to be able to bring that forward. And something that's in process is a phonological awareness app for Michef. And that happens to be a master's student in computer science, a master's project that they're doing for us. So we have these kinds of technology projects. And we also, like I said, run a master apprentice program. We also do consulting for school division and are working right now on have developed 2 programs for a university in Indigenous language pedagogy, and also development of allies in educational administration and core language and core subject teachers as well. So we're pretty busy.
Okay.
That's it.
Kichi Marcy.
I'm sorry, that's my cat. It's
That's
not a
also
small
thank
child
you.
or a baby that I'm torturing. It's my cat. Sorry. So if you want to get in touch with us, we put our contact information here. Both Olivia and I welcome your questions, comments, and ideas.
Yakoke Hachimeni Lee. That was a wonderful presentation. Heather and Olivia, you're getting lots of love in the chat on the webinar side. And I just really appreciate this presentation because I think it really speaks to what we were also hearing about from Candace, that, you know, technology is just a tool, it's not a solution. And that ultimately it's just one piece in a bigger language plan that we have for our communities, you know, now and into the future. So really amazing work. I can see lots of questions coming in, lots of interest in this project, and the Southern Michif course is available for free. We put the link in there, so we really encourage you to check out the course and to really, you know, use it and see what this project is all about. So now I'd like to bring Tanya back up so we can check in on the graphic recording.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kari. And thank you to presenters for that amazing overview of all that hard work. It's just incredible to see and really places it in context of what this looks like. And so we use sort of a theme of the Métis sash and how some of those threads might be linking in here to community and people, and that we're building something bigger as we're doing this language work, guided and rooted in knowledge keepers and language keepers. And some of the highlights around what this course is like and how it's designed, that we've gamified it, that there's audio and visual, and that it's progressive and learning at your own pace or whatever you can do. And following our SASH thread here, some of the challenges and considerations that are really important when designing a course like this, orthography and variation and dialects. It's complex and definitely something to keep in mind. Just move myself here for a second. Face-to-face learning, breath to breath is really key, but that we definitely with the online learning have this opportunity for building a robust community, and that should be thought of from the start when you're putting together these courses for sure. And another echo of that beautiful piece around data being owned by us as well, being really foundational to this. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, okay, Tanya. So the next presenters that I'd like to invite up are Lokosh, Joshua D. Hinson, and Juliet Morgan, who will join us to talk about the Chickasaw Rosetta Stone course. Lokosh is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and a conversational speaker of the Chickasaw language. He earned a PhD in Native Language Revitalization from the University of Oklahoma. He is currently the Executive Officer of the Division of Language Preservation in Ada, Oklahoma on the Chickasaw Nation Reservation. Juliet Morgan is a linguist for the Chickasaw Language Revitalization Program and also holds a PhD from the University of Oklahoma. In addition to her work on the Rosetta Stone project, she assists with curriculum development for the Chickasaw Academy Adult Immersion Program and further documents the grammar of current speakers and learners. Welcome, Lokosh and Juliet.
Chukma, Ilashka Chukma, Magnetic Kanan, Rosetta Stone, I am Chimanole Lacho. We're happy to be here and appreciate this opportunity. We're going to talk a little bit about our Rosetta Stone Chickasaw project today. Get that next slide. All right. So we're going to talk about who we are, not so much as individuals, but who we are as a community. Why we felt compelled to create this product, how we went about creating this product, And what are we doing with it now? And the variety of applications that we see emerging from Rosetta Stone Chickasaw. Our people, our homelands, the old country is in northeastern Mississippi, northwestern Alabama, parts of Tennessee and Kentucky. And we lived there from time immemorial until we were forced to remove beginning in 1837. Today, we reside on the Chickasaw Reservation located in south central Oklahoma, which was the traditional homelands of many other groups, including the Wichitas, the Caddos, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache. Indian Territory is a complicated place. And then here you see some of the images that we captured of our these few remaining native speakers. We'll talk more about them in the moments to come. We worked with Ryan Redcorn, who's an Osage photographer from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, who lives on the Osage Reservation. And these images really capture the beauty of all of our teachers. And we are appreciative of Ryan Redcorn capturing these. All right. So we're often asked, why would you create an online language course for your language? Why is it that you were able to develop this relationship with a company as large as Rosetta Stone? Is that even a good idea? We get lots of questions along these lines. And really the simple answer is people wanted it. People wanted it. We are a large tribal community. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about our size and our location, our demographics and so forth. But from the moment I took over direction of this program in 2007, people were constantly asking me, when are you going to do something online? They clearly wanted computer-aided language learning products of some sort. And because Rosetta Stone is a multinational company and has exceptional marketing, and you can see it all over the place, online, into kiosks at malls, back when malls were a thing, it's something that they were familiar with, right? And they wanted this for themselves. We had many other resources prior to beginning this project in 2014, 2015. Print materials, including 3 excellent dictionaries, grammar workbook. We have a prayer book that was authored by the Chickasaw Language Committee, children's books, cookbooks, flashcards. We have a language app that runs on Android and Apple devices. We have a ton of videos on Chickasaw.tv, ChickasawLanguage.com. And then, of course, adult community employee children's classes, an immersion program. We had a traditional master apprentice program here on the reservation. But as 7 years in roughly, as we were examining what we had been doing, what was working and what wasn't working, we really wanted to speak to the community directly, not just here on the reservation, but Chickasaws worldwide, and find out what is it that they really wanted in terms of the available resources. There's some sort of piece that was missing. And they indicated that they really wanted a structured online language learning course, surprisingly with regular assessments. They wanted to be tested. They wanted to know if they were doing good or not. And this falls in line with sort of our ethos, like we're committed to sort of 2 areas in our work. One is immersion, the creation of a new speech community, and also enrichment and education for the rest of our folks who may never actually be able to sit down in person in the same room, share space with a native speaker. Our mission for those people is to ensure that worldwide, regardless of where they lived, as long as they could find a Wi-Fi signal somewhere, they could have consistent, reliable access to their language without impediment. All right. So today we're a large nation. We all descend from roughly 1,700 people who managed to survive tribal warfare in the 1730s, and now we're up to 73,000 enrolled Chickasaw citizens, 57% of whom reside in the state of Oklahoma. 70% of us live off reservation, and we have approximately 35 native elder speakers remaining out of this population of 73,000. We have Chickasaws worldwide: Okinawa, the UK, Australia, and for this sort of large displaced diasporic community, many of whom have literally never heard the language, spread all across the state and the country. It was so critical to us that online education became a tool that we could leverage for the benefit of our people. It's not that we hadn't done other, media-based, web-based, that sort of stuff. This was something that they asked for very specifically, and they wanted to be guided in a leveled sort of way. So we decided to jump in and create this for them. All right. So we did not immediately form relationship and come to some agreement with Rosetta Stone. I spoke with them sometime around 2009, 2010, and they had at that time sort of put a pause on their Indigenous language program that had created products with the Chitimacha and the Navajo and the Mohawk and the Inupiaq and so forth. They weren't really doing that at that point. So we examined, other possibilities. One was even doing it ourselves, sort of a Rosetta Stone. But ultimately, we presented these options to tribal government, and our governor, Bill Anoa-Tubby, he came back and he said, we shouldn't miss an opportunity to provide something like this for our citizens. I'm not really concerned about the cost. What cost can you put on your language and helping it get to all of our people? So we were able to sit down at the table with Rosetta Stone. We worked out the intellectual property rights. We retain all rights to all the language content. It belongs to the Chickasaw Nation, to the Chickasaw Nation government, and to the people who elect our government. The only proprietary aspect of Rosetta Stone itself is their architecture, their program architecture, but all the language belongs to our people. And that was so critical. So once we were able to arrive at this agreement, we began to work and sort of examine what this could look like. We'll explore here more in a moment about what this custom product was really all about and enabled us to do. But you can see here, we created 40 lessons for each level. We began with a release in 2016, and then we're on track to hopefully complete level 4 by the fall of 2022. I will turn it over to Dr. Morgan at this point.
Yes, so like Josh said, we've been working on this product for 7 years now. By the end of this year, we hope to have all 160 lessons completed. It has been a lot of work. On this last line of the slide, I have a list of some of the elements that we created for each level. And these are some things that are probably common across all online language courses. In today's talk, we're going to specifically focus on the videos, audio recordings, and images, because these are elements that, of course, are not specific to the Rosetta Stone software. We are going to show you some screenshots of the Rosetta Stone software so you can see what this product that we're talking about looks like, but we're going to focus on how we centered Chickasaw community and culture and in the video, audio, and images. Before we move on to looking at the actual Chickasaw product, I did want to speak a little bit more about what that custom structure means, just in case anyone is familiar with Rosetta Stone, because the Chickasaw product looks really different from most of their other products. Usually their products use audio and images and text to teach. And this screenshot that I have here is from an Arabic product. And I think it's teaching the words for man and woman. But a common criticism I've seen of Rosetta Stone is that they use the same images and audio across their products. So they use the same stock images, they use the same vocabulary lists, and they just have them translated into that language and they record native speakers for that. So you can see the stock images being used here for the Arabic product. So we went in a different direction for the Chickasaw product. We did the custom structure. And one of the bigger differences was that we were able to use video. Usually there's no video in the Rosetta Stone products. And also, so like I said, they usually, like they could provide all of the images and they could provide the vocabulary list, and having all of that pre-decided and pre-recorded for you would have taken out a lot of the work for a product like this, but it also would erase so many of the opportunities to center Chickasaw culture and community. So that's just another reason why we went in the custom direction, to get the video and to avoid some of the issues that other Rosetta Stone products have. So now we are going to look at some screenshots of the actual Chickasaw Rosetta Stone Chickasaw product. And what we have right here is this menu bar that shows you all the elements that you see when you enter a lesson. And we're not going to have time today to look at all of these elements. We're just going to look at a few of them. So like I said, we're going to focus largely on the video, the images, and the audio. So the introduction to every lesson is a video, and it's entirely in Chickasaw. We're going to watch one of those in a moment. So this is the very first thing you see when you come into the lesson. And then once you complete the introductory video, you move into a vocabulary section that teaches you the new words that came up in the video. And then you move into a usage section, which explains some of the concepts. So this is the usage section is where you have more of the direct teaching. So these titles in this menu bar were kind of hard baked into the software. They were something that we could not change. So even though we got the custom product, that word is a little deceptive. It makes it sound like we could have built from scratch whatever we wanted, but that wasn't the case. And this is an example of that with these titles that we couldn't change. Like the term usage, I've always found kind of clunky, and we couldn't change that. And later, Kari suggested that we should try to make the whole product in Chickasaw. Could we translate these into Chickasaw? And that wasn't an option either because of some limitations of the Rosetta Stone software. So we're going to take a look at one of the introductory videos. So we're looking at one of them from this lesson, lesson 81. So this is a more advanced lesson. It's from the 3rd level. The initial level, the videos have a much simpler language, but this one is a little more advanced. And when I play it, you're going to see that there are English subtitles provided. When you're in the Rosetta Stone product, there are never any English subtitles. There's only the option for Chickasaw subtitles.
Ba selamat hasla. Chugma. Sahal chivon na shoba. Oklahoma atali. Kapocha totally ayok panchli. Tumpaligma chikashi yagni atuk salilachi. Yapat amafosi.
Chukma. So hold you for Charlie. Nane hotonse ayok panchli. Tumpali stagma. Oatalachi. Yapat so poktik.
Chukma soldier for Taloa. A chikoshkamo atok salili. A famikash chikasha iho hemeta malili lituk. Yapat Anki.
Chukma soldier for what Ben. Chikashi yak ni atok salili. A famikash anupabasha asisla itanali tuk. Yapat amiho.
Chukma sahoja po at Lisa. Chikasha ayatana atok salili. Tompale ish diagma o saposhia tok salilachi. Yapat sashke.
Chugma sahoja po at lili. Uksubstig beig panchli. Tumpalig machkasha numpa imobachilachi.
So if you were going to be creating this sort of content for an online course, we wanted to point out a few things that we learned from doing this. And these are kind of some encouraging words that if you were going to take on this kind of work, you don't necessarily need to have a large cast of fluent speakers. Everyone in the video is a Chickasaw citizen, but only the 2 grandparents are native speakers. The other 4 members of the family were learning the language as they did this work. You don't necessarily need a whole lot of sets to visit. Most of our videos center on being in the home, and the Chickasaw family home that was featured in the videos is actually Lokosh's old home. So the Chickasaw film crew used to regularly just invade his home and record there. You don't need an expansive scope of topics. Like I said, most of our videos centered in the home. So most of the time, the videos were just, what is this family doing? What are they talking about? What are they, their day-to-day lives, you know, just hanging out in the home, cleaning, cooking, going to the grocery store, things like that. You also don't need a large group of people to create this sort of content. Most of this content was created by Josh, Kari, and myself under the direction of an elder speaker committee with 4 native speakers, and of course, lots of support from Chickasaw Nation leadership and Rosetta Stone personnel. But mostly the content was created by quite a small group, which I think often surprises people given how large this product is. So once you watch the introductory video, which they're always all in Chickasaw, we don't usually have the family like speaking to the learner like that. It's usually more of like a sitcom style, like there's little story arcs and we try to be funny. But once you watch the video, it introduces what you're gonna cover in the lesson. We don't expect the learner to understand everything that they saw the first time, but once they finish the video, they move into the vocabulary section. And in the product that functions sort of like these little flashcards that pop up. So here's an example from this lesson. This is the word. You see the image and the word, and then you flip it and you get the translation. This is the word for grandpa. And then there's 2 example sentences, and these are usually lines from the video. And you can hear the recording. And I wanted to focus in this section on the images. So like I said, Rosetta Stone can provide stock images for these products, and they did provide a lot of stock images, but we tried to use custom created images where we could, and all the images were curated by members of the Chickasaw Rosetta Stone team. Here are 2 more examples of some more of the vocabulary images, some more of the custom images that were created. And these are 2 more family terms. We have daughter and son. And I wanted to point out here that the family being shown in the videos is also real family. The actresses playing mother and daughter are actually mother and daughter, and the actors playing the father and son are actually father and son. At the moment, the product does have a lot of stock images, but we do have plans once we finish level 4 this year to then go back and try to replace as many of the images we can with these custom ones, because they're just so much richer and better for the learner. Once you finish the vocabulary section, we then move into this usage section. This is really text heavy, but it also usually has audio for every sort of card. It works similar to the vocabulary flashcards. The cards pop up. They show you something in the language and then they explain it as well. So here's an example of a usage card from this same lesson. And this is discussing some variation in pronunciation and spelling. And when the card pops up, you hear the audio. So I'm going to play the audio, and then Josh is going to take over from here to discuss the audio.
Chikashiyagne. Chikashayagne. Chikashanompole. Chikasha anompole. Chikashanompa.
Chikasha anumpa.
All right. So what you just heard was several speakers. The first Chikashi Yagni was me, and then native speaker Stan Smith. You heard Luther John, and then Rose Shields Jefferson. Not only in the recordings themselves, but also in some of the background tech, the speech recognition technology. We felt like it was really critical for our community of learners to be able to hear both native speakers and then conversational affluent second language speakers. So we mixed these in as much as we were able to. And in capturing the sort of the source audio for the speech recognition component, we included a variety of people, many of whom had never spoken Chickasaw before, full-on native speakers, and then those of us that are somewhere in the middle, because we wanted people to not feel like there was some sort of unreachable standard that they have to be as native-like as possible to be considered a speaker or to communicate, because that's just simply not the case. So again, I'd like to reinforce that this is truly a custom solution. Rosetta Stone had never done anything like this, particularly to this degree, and so focused so heavily on video. The choices that we made were simply reflections of community values. As Dr. Morgan mentioned, both Dr. Chu and I are citizens of the Chickasaw Nation, and it was really critical to us to provide something where a citizen could be using it and see something reflected of themselves. So all of these lessons center on Chickasaw families. All the extras are Chickasaw citizens. We carefully curated the images. Many are customized, and as Dr. Morgan said, eventually they'll all be Chickasaw images that we'll actually create ourselves. The focus on home, family, community, and how they bring their language out to places all across the reservation and even north of the reservation into Oklahoma City. It's a strange and sort of artificial world that we've created, but it's one that we aspire to. You know, we haven't had natural speech transmission in the home since the 1940s until quite recently. But this is something that we truly hope to see in the future, is Chickasaw people using their language to communicate with one another again. All right. So today we have over 8,100 users of Rosetta Stone Chickasaw. When we first began this project, our goal was 10% of the tribal population, and you know that would be 7,300 people now. So we've clearly exceeded that goal. This curriculum is significant, and that it's the very first multi-level comprehensive in-depth curriculum with regular assessments ever created for Chickasaw. Additionally, Dr. Chu has created an expansion curriculum to be used in classrooms, and classrooms in the broadest sense of that term. You can take this individual sort of asynchronous experience and it's being used in very interesting and particular ways to create interactive group experiences and to develop in some ways new speech communities, both in person and then online. So specifically at Being High School, which is north of us, there are 70 some odd students in 2 sections that are learning Chickasaw using Dr. Chu's expansion curriculum with the base of Rosetta Stone Chickasaw. And it's a really, really interesting group of kids. They're loving what they're doing. They're creating in the language. They're creating memes. They love it. It's really it's wonderful, frankly. The curriculum itself, the program itself, is also being used for online community classes and study groups, and it plays a critical part in our new adult immersion program, this sort of underlying scope and sequence, and some of the stories that we're able to pull from the product. One of the most sort of personally meaningful aspects of this expansion to me is this, the reality of the online community classes or study groups. You know, these are totally citizen-led. It wasn't our idea necessarily. It just popped up and started doing it. And what's really great when I visit these groups is that they're actually using this product to begin to communicate with one another. Even if it isn't a virtual space, it's a new kind of life for our language. And this is something that we're deeply committed to. Okay. Right. We appreciate this time. We'd be happy to, we'll take any questions at the end, or if you want to email us, contact information is here. We regularly consult with people that and communities that are interested in doing something with Rosetta Stone, or also considering something sort of off on their own that's Rosetta Stone-like. So we'd be happy to share the lessons that we've learned in any way that we can. Yakuki Chimene.
Yakuke. So thank you so much to Lokosh and Juliet for sharing about this project. It's near and dear to my heart too, because as Lokosh mentioned, you know, bringing the language back into the home is so important. And actually for my family, Rosetta Stone Chickasaw has been really important because I not only worked on it, which actually was a really good learning experience in terms of increasing proficiency in the language, but now I can use it with my little one. And it's actually one of the most helpful tools that my family has to making Chickasaw a language of the home and raising a little one in the language. You know, and it's really special for her to have access to speakers who, you know, have passed on, and she can hear their voices and connect with them that way when she sees them in the videos and she hears their words, you know, coming through the computer screen.
Kari, my apologies, but I would like all the attendees to note that Kari's daughter, Hatafbushik, is the first native speaker since the 1940s.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Her first language that she heard was Chikashinompa, and we've been doing our best to keep that up. But you know, with the pandemic, you know, I think that that's kind of at a backdrop of all of this too, is kind of separated time with family and speakers. And so Rosetta Stone Chickasaw has been a really amazing tool for us during this time. So let's check back in with Tanya with our graphic recording.
Perfect, thank you. That was a beautiful presentation, and just really inspiring to see how this work has come to life, and specifically that piece around connecting people to language from wherever they are, and that the Rosetta Stone work is customized for Chickasaw, using videos, and flashcards, and language and translations. And it's very important that community is represented in that as well, and seeing families and people and faces. So further connecting people back to community and language. And the beautiful, inspiring piece around you can create content using whatever language learners you have available with a small team. You don't have to have fancy sets. And that most of all, it's really beautiful to hear voices of elders and language keepers who may not be with us anymore as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, okay. So the remainder of our time is open for questions, and we have a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A. And one of the questions that I see coming up is around the platforms that everyone chose to use. And so you've probably heard, you know, not just of Rosetta Stone and 7,000 languages, but also like Duolingo and Memrise. There's lots of them out there. And all of them have different types of features. There's pros and cons of all of them. And so one question that came up, and I'll start off with Heather and Olivia, if you could speak to this. You know, what made you choose 7,000 languages for your course?
I would like to say that it was after a lot of research and soul searching and things like that we chose 7,000 languages. But it was actually the product of one day looking on the internet, as I often do, for opportunities. And I saw this one from the National Research Council of Canada saying that they had funding to create online courses, and it was with 7,000 languages. And so I reached out, and that was the start, really. Our organization is small, and we don't have core funding. It's project-based funding, really is what has been keeping us afloat, and my family, I guess. But so we had to look for a way. And since it was going to be the platform, it was going to be free, and 7,000 languages was donating their time and the development. And the National Research Council of Canada was going to pay for the costs of developing on our side. It was really, that was why we chose it. And if this opportunity hadn't come across our path, we probably wouldn't have an online course today.
Okay, and I know in the chat and the webinar that there's others that are creating courses on 7,000 languages, and also that Stephanie, who is the executive director of 7,000 languages, is here and shared information in the chat. So you can always reach out to 7,000 languages directly if you have questions about that platform. And Lokosh and Juliet, you talked a little bit about, you know, coming to a Rosetta Stone Chickasaw project, but I wondered if you might speak to why specifically Rosetta Stone? Were there certain features of it that were appealing compared to other platforms?
I think ultimately the reality of the situation is that we needed to partner with a group that had the ability to pull off this thing which was so massive in scope. And so we made this sort of decision to work with Rosetta Stone because they had, frankly, a compelling platform. Like everyone has been saying, it's just a tool, but we felt like not only was there interest from citizens because, you know, everyone's like, oh, Rosetta Stone, I know that they're like, they must be the greatest language company in the world. In part, it was motivational because they think, oh, that's really cool, based on Rosetta Stone's really excellent marketing. But there were other options, like you mentioned, Duolingo, and that simply was not going to work for us because it's largely crowdsourced. There is one fluent speaker who can read and write in modern orthography, and that's me. The native speakers do not care to do any of that work. So, I mean, it was just like a non-starter. Obviously, we had some concerns about intellectual property, and we were able to work through those. But for the same reason, we partnered with a media group that would create the videos because, you know, they're good at creating videos. We're good at language. Rosetta Stone's good at presenting this language in an interesting way online. So at a certain point, even though we offered kind of a DIY approach, Governor expressed his commitment to this project, and he said, I don't care, there's no price to be put on language. So it was entirely funded by tribal government.
Okay, so that actually connects really nicely to another question that has come in. And Candace, maybe I'll ask you this question to start us off, is what ideas do you have for funding language projects that incorporate technology?
I think some of this was touched upon in the various presentations today. I think about, you know, what is our immediate language goals and what are the best ways to reach these language goals? Is it through technology, or are there other more meaningful, appropriate, and relevant practices that we can look to and not force ourselves into technology? I think, you know, knowing what resources are available, so getting an environmental scan of human resources that are available, you know, language speakers, language teachers, language learners, what financial support is there, and digital infrastructure that is in existence. Oftentimes we don't realize what kind of infrastructure we need in order to create these digital tools and technologies and to access the outcome or the output of that. Can we leverage our resources and networks that we have access to in our communities, in the places that we work, the universities? And then thinking of, in locating funds, learning more about the funding agency, their motivation, their intention, their mission. Is this a one-off funding, or do they offer sustainable funding? I think Heather talked about this in their work. Also, is funding limited to documentation and preservation, or does it support language revitalization, reclamation, and education efforts? I often see funding that is available, but again, it doesn't support that living language aspect. Like, our languages are living and are breathing, and we need to be using this in community. I'd also begin to find out what are the parameters of the grant or the funding. What is required at the end of the grant or throughout the grant? Do we need to deposit our language into a repository? And then going back to, again, what was discussed in all of our presentations, who will essentially own, control, and have access to these materials? So an early investigation of, again, legal issues around intellectual property, copyright, and data sovereignty. After all of this background information is done, then determining what are we willing to give up or negotiate or produce in order to get funding. In the end, we're all competing for the same funding, and the same funding is very limited. So what ways can we work together to inform our languages in our specific communities? So like Lokosh said, we can form partnerships. So looking to even other communities or Indigenous organizations and learn from their practices. So these are just some of my thoughts in regards to funding, not directly answering where to look for funding, but again, all the considerations when looking at funding resources.
Okay, Candace. So shifting gears now, these courses can be really helpful. I think we've seen a lot of benefits for beginning language learners of increasing proficiency fairly quickly, using an online course. And so Lokosh and Juliet, I wondered, what potential do you see for online courses to support, maybe more advanced language learners or even, fluent speakers?
That's a really interesting question. And I'm not really sure that the answer to it is fully developed. Here in the small group of people that's doing this work, but we do see, I've seen people moving increasingly to sort of intermediate kind of levels of proficiency. And they're just chomping at the bit to get level 4 because they know that something really cool is coming. I guess the most immediate application of that for language learners would be a significant aspect of Rosetta Stone Chickasaw level 3 and 4 developed really from Dr. Chu's input was a focus on narratives. This is something that if I could go back in time, we would redo levels 1 and 2. But these narratives are so integral to who we are as a people, and they're such a powerful tool. We're pulling them out, as I mentioned earlier, and using them in the adult immersion program. So while those adult participants are learning, they'll work through all 140 lessons of Chickasaw, Rosetta Stone Chickasaw. More importantly, they're using the stories, narratives from our native speakers to become truly proficient in a relatively short period of time. As far as the benefits for native speakers, at least in my experience, there's just a joy to be had as they spend time together. In so many ways, they're socially isolated other than outside of their families because there's no one to talk to anymore. So as we bring them together, they're able to laugh and joke and talk and watch these videos that they helped author and see other learners and native speakers using their language. It's like 1953 all over again, and they're hanging out under that tree on Main Street here in Ada. It's pretty awesome. And they're like real overt about it. Like, we love this. We love getting together. We're so tired of COVID. We just want to talk Chickasaw. So it's been really good as our case counts drop here on the reservation. As of yesterday, we have 1 person with COVID in our hospital, which is a big deal. We're looking forward to something new in the summer, and they are too.
Okay. And, I'll add to, you all saw one of these videos, and I know that in the chat, people were really enjoying it. And so thinking about, a point that Heather and Olivia also made, that, some of the components of these courses can be repurposed in different ways. Well, those videos are actually like media content that's all in the language. And so while my 2-year-old maybe doesn't sit down and log into Rosetta Stone Chickasaw to use the whole interface, she definitely logs on and looks at the videos. And that's, one of the only forms of media right now that she has in Chickasaw to engage in. So there's kind of a cult following around the characters, especially the son, the Shoba. He's always playing pranks on people. And so the kids in the high school class love him. My 2-year-old loves him. Every time he does something funny, they're always like, the Shoba, at it again.
Yeah.
So our next question is about, typically we think of these courses as serving those middle generations, our adults and our older youth who didn't grow up with the language. And so Heather and Olivia, I wondered, what are your thoughts about how we can use these technologies like online courses to actually engage young children and elders, even more?
Olivia, do you have some thoughts you want to share first, or?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I don't know that I, have any concrete answers. Like we designed our course sort of aimed at beginning learners that are, middle school and up, I think. I really like the idea of using videos like you guys have been saying. I think that is really engaging. Heather, do you have thoughts?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do know that one of the people that is a user of our course and who we featured in our slides, Candace, her daughter, is 8 years old and loves using the course. So I thought, I thought about that, said, wow, we thought it was, like Olivia was saying, for more middle school and up because it's text-based, but she obviously is able to deal with the text, and a lot of it is quite simple. So in the beginning anyways. So yeah, so I don't know, there's that. And then I do know of, it depends on who you mean by older. I mean, I'm already 60 years old, but I know of other either latent speakers or older people that people older than me that never got a chance to learn the language, and they're comfortable online with the course. They're using it. It's not that hard an interface. So I don't know. I think more and more people are getting comfortable with online, with call type pedagogy, and but in a perfect world in ours, we would have used a lot more images. And I think this was mentioned in one of the slides. We would have used video. We absolutely would have. And you can, with 7,000 languages, do that. But there were some certain constraints, not the least of which was, was money and also time. So you have to do what you can do within the time and the resources that you have. But yeah, I mean, video is awesome. Yeah, so I'm, I look at the Rosetta Stone course and think, yeah, that would be wonderful too, but we're pleased with the response that we've had to our small contribution as well.
And the games, like, and the quotes that we had from the users, it was the games, I think, that really stuck out to the user's kids. So
yeah. Gamification, I guess, is fun. You have to have fun. It has to be play. If they can, if people can play. I mean, that's the other thing with our language, and I can't speak for Chickasaw, but the number of domains in which we can use our language are really limited. And so being able to have fun together and have an emotional attachment to language through using, say, a course like this, that's really the best we can ask for.
Yeah, okay. So I know that we don't have time to get to every question that's been asked, but one really great question that came up is, are there trainings that I could do to learn more about language revitalization, creating curriculum for Indigenous languages? And Candace, I know that you've been involved with the American Indian Language Development Institute and other programs. So I wondered if you might want to give a little plug for those types of programs.
Yeah. I think the American Indian Language Development Institute that you just mentioned is a great resource and a great place that brings together Indigenous language speakers, learners, and allies. And so they do training, and I believe this summer is done online. There are other Indigenous language institutes that some of us are familiar with, the Northwest Indian Language Institute, CILDI, the Canadian Indigenous Language and Literacy Development Institute. There are also other, maybe more regional institutes and programs like Breath of Life. And then, of course, some of the universities that we are affiliated with. So the University of British Columbia, University of Victoria, where Kari visited as a professor there for a couple of years, and then University of Oklahoma as well. So I think there are now a growing number of programs or courses or institutes, Indigenous institutes. Oh, I should also mention the Indigenous Language Institute in Santa Fe, that offer training for individuals and communities wanting to revitalize language through technology. And again, because we are still, grappling with the pandemic, these opportunities are now afforded online. And so take a look at what is out there. And I know within this community that you often see even workshops offered by some of the panelists here. So just a shout out and mahalo to all of you who've presented today. I've learned so much and am inspired by all of your work. Mahalo.
Okay. So, and if anyone in the chat knows other programs, feel free to drop a link to those. I want to say thank you all for coming. We have a final slide that shares words of thanks in the languages of our presenters and organizing team. As you sign off, we invite you to share in the chat a short message of encouragement to others who are working to learn, teach, and speak their Indigenous languages. Happy International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Yakuke Ichimeni Ichipisachon.